All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm super excited to have you joining us for our first ever SpiSEA seminar. SpiSEA short for Space in Southeast Asia. This is an initiative that was started by the SGAC team, some of the SGAC members, in which we try to host a couple of virtual discussions to give everyone about an overview of the ongoing activities happening in the region space sector, as well as discuss some of the challenges, roadmaps, and opportunities that lie ahead. So just a quick introduction about who we are. The team is from the Space Generation Advisory Council, which is an organization, non-governmental organization that aims to represent university students and young space professionals aged 18 to 35 to the United Nations, space agencies, industry, and academia. Today, the SGAC network of members, volunteers, and alumni has grown to more than 15,000 members over 150 countries. If any of you are interested in joining this network, do feel free to reach out to us, to any of us from SGAC in the chat, or to your country's NPOC, which can be found on the SGAC website itself. So before we start, I do want to cover some house rules, which is that we hope that all of you could remain muted for the duration of the webinar. But if you have any questions, we are more than excited to answer them. Throughout the panel, you are free to type in your questions into chat. We do have a couple of members who are moderating the questions, so we will try to get your questions answered. It's still too early, guys. It's still too early for us. But yeah. So without further ado, I will actually hand it over to our moderator for today, Marco, as well as our panelists, Chris Leck, Dr. Gay Perez, as well as Dr. Nordin, to start the discussion.
Thank you, Jillian, for the handover, and a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone here, wherever you might be tuning in from. My name is Marco Marsh. I am an SGAC member and an NPOC for Malaysia, and a member of the SpiSEA webinar team. It's really great to have you here, and it's a particularly exciting occasion, not only because it's the inaugural session for the SpiSEA series, but we also have some very interesting panelists joining us today. And I thought I'd give you a brief introduction to each one now, starting with Chris Leck from Singapore. He is the Deputy Executive Director of Singapore's National Space Office, the Office for Space Technology and Industry in Austin. Looking back at his credentials, Chris has served in the Singapore Public Service for some 20 years, and his past roles have included the Deputy Group Director for the Land Transport Authority, Director for the Ministry of Transport, and First Secretary for the United Nations in New York for the Permanent Mission of Singapore. Chris graduated from the London School of Economics with a bachelor's degree in government and economics, and he has also a master's degrees in international relations and international law from Columbia University, the Australian National University, and Tel Aviv University. Chris, good to have you with us.
Thanks very much, Marco. Glad to be here, and thanks very much for the invitation to SGAC.
Not at all. Our second panelist joining us from the Philippines is Gay Jane Perez. Dr. Perez serves as the Deputy Director General for Space Science and Technology at the Philippine Space Agency, PhilSA. She is also an Associate Professor and Scientist at the Institute of Environmental Science and Meteorology, the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Prior to her appointment at PhilSA, Dr. Perez has led various programs on satellite development in the Philippines, as well as other projects that utilize satellites and remote sense data for environmental applications and climate studies. She is a recipient of the Outstanding Women in the Nation's Service Towns Award in 2019, and is the first Filipino woman to receive an ASEAN-US Science Prize for Women in 2018. Dr. Perez, it's great to have you with us today.
Hi, thank you, Marco, and good morning, everyone. Good day for those who are on the other side of the globe. happy to be here and looking forward to our engaging discussion later.
And of course, we have joining us as well from Malaysia, Dr. Nordik Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Norden as we call him, served as the Director General of the National Space Agency of Malaysia, MISA, formerly known as Angkasa, until 2018. He currently holds the position as the Principal of Intech X Creation. Dr. Norden obtained his geomatics degree from the University of Melbourne in Australia in 1984 and a PhD in GPS positioning from the University of Newcastle in the United Kingdom in 1988. He is also an adjunct lecturer, Faculty of Engineering in the University of Putra, Malaysia, since 1998, with more than 50 journal papers and has supervised more than 30 research graduates. Dr. Norden, it's great to have you with us. You're on mute, Dr. Norden.
Thank you very much for inviting me into this session. Hopefully it benefits others to share some experience with me. Thank you.
Not at all, no trouble at all. And we thought we'd start with a question to ease into today's conversation with a cultural reference. Really, what is your favorite space-themed film? I guess starting from alphabetically with the first name, Chris, I'll hand this one over to you.
Right, thanks, Marco. Okay, well, that's probably the most challenging question. I don't know. Okay, I think for me, really, I would say The Martian. It's one of my favorite space-themed films because it really gives a good idea, I think, what humankind is trying to do with space exploration. And I understand that when the movie was made, the movie makers consulted, I think, very closely with NASA. So it gives a very nice flavor, I think, to space and what I think we're all trying to achieve.
I'm a big fan of The Martian myself. Dr. Perez, do you share the same sentiment?
Hi, well, I like The Martian, but I guess my favorite would be the Hidden Figures. I don't know if you know about that film, but I really like it because it, well, obviously it features women in color in the US, at NASA in particular. But really what I find special about this movie is how individuals working in a space agency really makes a contribution, significant contribution. Although, like what the movie says, it's hidden figures. Normally, we don't hear about these individual contributions. What we hear are the outcome or the output, like putting an astronaut in space or launching a satellite. So we see the end of it, but really behind it are thousands of individuals doing their best, contributing. And to me, that really captures the essence of space sector. It's doing something bigger than individual components and or individual contributions. So I really like how it is portrayed in that film.
It is very well portrayed. Dr. Norden, how about yourself?
Okay, I'm not a movie goer in reality, especially science fiction, because when we are involved in science, we know that this is all fiction. Okay, so however, usually I like true stories, so happen to be the Apollo 13. I don't know whether you have seen it. That was probably my last on the space because it was a true story. Otherwise, the others are more on fiction. So I don't really like fiction. I like something that's happening, what's happening, real story. So I'm hoping that more real situations are being portrayed, so that it's more educational in that sense. But that was the last 1995. I think that was the time, Apollo 13, when they have the problems, and it was really interesting. So that was my movie of talking about space. Thank you.
Tom Hanks was terrific in that film, wasn't he? Since we're now diving really into space, I guess we'll remain with you, Dr. Norden, but really a question for the floor. What is your perspective of the space sector in Southeast Asia?
Okay, the interest of space in this Southeast Asia, I think, is blooming, if I can use the right term here, mainly because of, I mean, if you look around us in this region, we have started to talk about cooperations between the regions. I mean, could be 10 years ago in the space sector, mainly because we are left quite far before that. But now there are so many, who would say, actors already working with especially with those developed nations who are far ahead in this area of space sector. So hence the not so much on industry, but more on going to the first stage of trying to gain the involvement in the space sector together with those who are more advanced in this area. So I see there's very great prospect in this region for space sector, and the government are in fact all the government in this region are supporting the involvement, especially the universities and also the industry, to be together in developing this sector. Thank you.
Dr. Perez, over to you.
I couldn't agree more with what Dr. Nordin said. Indeed, there are more space actors coming in, especially in our region. We are recognizing more than ever the value of space in our day-to-day lives, with all the data that we are getting from satellites, and how it is used to guide us in making a decision. No? So the space industry is also becoming more affordable, I guess I should say, in the sense that before we are just launching big satellites, but now we can do meaningful missions with small satellites, and thus there are more varied space players, as Dr. Nordin said. Universities can also participate by having their own space technology development programs. So yeah, it's really a very exciting time for us in the region.
Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I fully agree as well. I think with the other two speakers, the space sector in the region really is, I think, rapidly going. And I mean, the way perhaps I would think of it is, what's really interesting perhaps is that, in the past, we were really more end users, I suppose, of space technologies, whether we're talking about remote sensing, communications, and so on. But what's, I suppose, very exciting now is that we are starting to shift, from just being end users to also being developers of the technology. And I think, like what Dr. Perez and Dr. Nordin have said, we are seeing more R&D taking place in our universities, in industry. And I think for me personally also, I'm very excited by what's going on in the startup sector, because I think we are also seeing startups, really blooming across the region. I mean, here in Singapore, for example, we now have more than 20 space startups already. And they're just coming out. I mean, popping out of the woodwork almost. We are finding that new startups that we don't even know about here in Singapore. So I think if you take these, as proxies as well for how well the region is doing, I fully agree that it's something that we ought to be very optimistic about.
And I do feel it's an exciting time to be involved in this sector. Certainly, we will circle around to R&D as it relates to universities, particularly for Dr. Perez and Dr. Nordin a little later on. But I suppose, drawing back to Dr. Perez, the question that I have is, how does the space agency in the Philippines play a role in strengthening the overall capability of the space sector? I'm just curious about this.
Well, so at the Philippine Space Agency, we are really looking at both ends of the space sector. So I'm referring to the upstream and the downstream sector. So for the downstream sector, of course, remote sensing, utilizing satellite data, but really, as Chris mentioned earlier, more than end users, we are now developing products as well. So we are creating value, additional value from this data, and convert it to information that could better help our planners, managers, and decision makers. Now, on the upstream side, PhilSA is also embarking on the advanced satellite development. So previously, through the help of the Department of Science and Technology, the Philippines have developed microsatellites and nanosatellites, and now the Philippine Space Agency leverages on those initiatives and continue the advancement on satellite development. So with this, we also acquire the technical know-how to apply this technology or the learnings that we acquire to other industries. So this is what we call the spillover effect. So not only we're looking at space related technologies, but also how it cascades to various high-tech industries, like in perhaps in transportation, communication, and many others. So really for the Philippines, it's both the upstream, developing the upstream and the downstream sector of space ecosystem.
That's a wonderful segue. Speaking of the ecosystem, it's a system as a whole, really to Chris, as it relates to the ongoing steps that might be required to capitalize the space sector in Southeast Asia, particularly for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and this can be an international or a domestic context, as you prefer, Chris.
Right. Sure, Marco. Thanks for the question. I think if you asked this question, say 10 years ago, for example, and I mean, this is of course before even the SDGs were adopted, but I thought that, if you think about it, like say 10 years ago, some of the folks that would answer the question, they might well say that, this is really something where governments need to step up, take charge, invest in space capabilities needed to support, I think, the objectives of the SDGs. But today, I think the answer would be rather different. And I mean, the way I would think about it is that, given the, I suppose, emergence of the new space economy, there's really room for things to be done, I think, quite differently from how they were done before. And this is, of course, a personal view, but I suspect that the answer really lies in the creation of a market really for space solutions, and how we can better let that market flourish if we want to get the most bang for our buck. And what do I mean by that? I mean, well, I'm a political scientist and economist by training. So, if you look at this issue of markets, in any market, there are always issues of demand and supply. And in our region, I think first, of course, we need to awaken demand by building awareness of the use cases that space solutions can serve. So whether we're talking about, say, better urban planning, better environmental monitoring, and so on. And as we were just talking about this earlier, I think in Southeast Asia, this demand is really fast growing, and people are starting to recognize the benefits that space can bring. Then the second part, of course, is generating supply. And today, there are many private players, especially startups, that are providing space-based solutions. And a lot of these guys, these new space players, are proving that they can move much faster and do things at much lower cost compared to your traditional space players and governments. So I think, to me, the issue is how perhaps we can encourage the private sector, whether international players elsewhere or local players from within the region, to understand that Southeast Asia is really a big market for them, and they need to think about how they can develop the capabilities to serve the region. And maybe let me just give you one quick example. In Singapore, we have this startup called Pacific. So Pacific saw the demand for broadband internet in remote and underserved regions in our region. And they went ahead, they raised the financing, and they launched a satellite that actually now provides broadband connectivity to many of these underserved areas in our region. So today, because of the satellite that they've put up, you have, say, healthcare workers, clinics in remote regions who now have access to telemedicine. We also have, say, teachers, students who now have access to educational resources remotely. So to me, what we really want to do is to really encourage success stories like this, more of these types of outcomes. Yep. Back to you, Marco.
Well, that's an incredible example, Chris. Thanks. That's given me a lot to think about. And it kind of ties into a question to Dr. Norden about Malaysia's involvement in the space sector. Perhaps there are similar threads or themes that Dr. Norden can share about this one.
Okay, the development in the space sector in Malaysia, I mean, it started with, of course, more on the planetary science, where our first director, Dr. Mazlan, he was later being seconded to UN USA. I mean, she started the reason for the enthusiasm of the people to move into the space sector. Hence, I would say that what possibly been highlighted by Chris, we have now moved a little bit trying to develop the industries, hoping that because in this part of the world, the industries, space industries is still, I would say, very much at the early stage, and not many are able to move or able to come at with a good project or a good initiative. Although many universities have started to provide the expertise and human resource in order to help the industries. But I would say that what Chris has highlighted just now, I find that it is something that many parts of, especially I would say that like Indonesia, they have now also going to this small medium industries in space, although they are more on the aeronautics, but it started with aeronautics, but that's in Vietnam as well. I think that's where in Malaysia as well, we find that now there are few companies have already come in trying to have more involvement in the space sector.
It's interesting, Dr. Norden, in your perceptions of how you or other folks in Southeast Asia see themselves on the global stage with respect to the space sector. It seems like the point you are trying to drive home there is it's an ongoing process, it's still developing, and that there is still more progress to be made. Would you agree?
Totally, yeah. There are a lot more. There's still, I mean, there's a big gap. Still a big gap. Especially we still have the dilemma of building our expertise, our internal expertise. When I was the Director General, we drafted out the policies. The main thing that we see are, I mean, the three main things that we see is the governance. And luckily here in Malaysia, I mean, in Philippines, they started with the bill. For us, we just tabled the bill last parliament sitting. Now the parliament sitting is closed, but in last parliament sitting, they managed to table the bill. Hopefully it will be approved soon. Then we also look at the areas of technology that will involve. I mean, we have to be selective. We cannot involve in all sectors of the.
We might have.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. There's a intermittent. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm not sure where we quite lost you.
Okay.
But I think you're explaining about how it was passed through Parliament as it relates to the Philippines.
Yeah, the Philippines started with their bill, and then they managed to have the space agency now. We started the space agency long way ago, but now we only started looking at the bill. It's the reverse, yeah. So I mean, the Philippines have done the right way actually.
Dr. Perez, I think it'd be remiss not to bring you up here.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nordin. Well, what essentially happened in the Philippines, well, it's correct, no? We had the bill and the law actually approved in 2019, which established the Philippine Space Agency. But actually, prior to that, there are already activities, and I think that's crucial to be able to demonstrate that we have a chance as a space actor here. I mean, I think it will be harder if we don't have this, I guess, like proof that we can get into space, we can build the technology, we can demonstrate the use of the data that we're getting from our satellites. So these activities came ahead actually several years before the bill was written and before it was enacted into law. And I think they all helped. And now really the challenge is how to sustain the momentum. We have to continue what was already started in the past, and we have to build on it and even enhance it. So that's where we are now. The Philippine Space Agency is building up, but we are not building from scratch. So we have something leveraging from, and that really helps a lot.
It's a nice segue to Chris talking about momentum building and leveraging. Chris, is there an aspect of Singapore to develop themselves as a space player in the industry and building momentum for that? Do you see that yourself?
Yes, that's I think certainly the case for us too. You know, we are probably one of the kind of like newest kids on the block, you know, when we're talking about space within the region. And Austin, as the National Space Office, I mean, we were only given our mandate just last year in April. So probably, you know, our mandate is newer than, say, I think the Philippine Space Agency, which I understand was, I think, set up 2 years ago maybe. Yeah, so, you know, it's a fairly new ground for us. But I think we're very much excited by the possibilities that space could bring for Singapore. I mean, we have really done, I think, quite a lot of, we have a lot of players, I think, in our local research ecosystem. We've been looking at space over the years. So in a way, it's not totally new to us. But I think as Austin, we are very keen to see how we can really level up the ecosystem even more, whether it's in terms of investing in R&D, but also I think in terms of helping our local industry players to also level up, better understand the opportunities that are out there. And, you know, perhaps even for Austin to bring the research community together with industry to see how all together, you know, there can be kind of like the a whole of nation kind of approach towards space. And I think increasingly there is that sentiment that we all do need to work together because there are so many benefits that space can bring. And really, you know, you need to bridge that gap. I think Dr. Perez was talking about that earlier, you know, bridging that upstream all the way to downstream, you know, making sure that whatever research is done, there are, you know, beneficial outcomes from, I suppose, all perspectives, whether it's to do with applications, you know, towards real use cases that can help us all, but also to commercial outcomes, because you do need good commercial outcomes, I think, to encourage companies to continue to invest in this space and to really bring us all forward.
Yes, indeed. And it's an interesting point for Dr. Perez as it relates to applications and possibilities. Dr. Perez, I was wondering if you could describe just a little bit about some of the organizational involvement for fostering, promoting, and ensuring economic development in the Philippines. I think you touched on some earlier, but just to scratch a bit underneath the surface, I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Thank you for the question. So to bring this valuable data to the end users, we really have to work with stakeholders. And in our case, for the Philippine Space Agency, apart from the establishment of the agency, there is also, the law also created the Philippine Space Council, which is essentially a platform where the various government agencies can directly interact with the Philippine Space Agency and even maybe guide in terms of the programs, the national space programs that we are developing. So this Philippine Space Council, I'll just mention a few members that are represented here. We have the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the National Defense, Department of Science and Technology, among many other government agencies. So there's this direct connection. So we make sure that the missions that we are developing would be responsive to the needs of these various agencies. And of course, that will cascade to the needs of our society. Now, it seems like easy if you visualize it, like, okay, we're all connected, so it will eventually lead to the end user. But really, there are a lot of work that needs to be done in between, adopting this technology, the tools that are developed in this sector really takes a lot of effort also. So we are looking at this as a collective effort for it to be really successful. Later on, I can actually cite a few very specific examples if time permits, but maybe that's it for now.
Thanks, Dr. Perez. There's certainly a lot to digest when it comes to applications. It seems very, lack of a better term, very wide-reaching. I think there are many natural segues and many different projects and exciting initiatives. I think Chris touched on one earlier with the example he gave for telemedicine in Singapore. Out of interest for yourself, Chris, and the folks that you work with, are there any particularly interesting, exciting initiatives that you or your colleagues are involved in?
Yes, I think it's something that we are that I suppose very keen to focus on. I mean, in terms of the kind of projects that we can really roll out, our focus, I think, as Austin over the next couple of years is really to see how we can better tap on space technology to support national priorities in terms of say areas like aviation, maritime, sustainability, as well as to really grow our local space ecosystem to be globally competitive. So, to do this, we are really investing significantly in R&D. So as one example, we've recently launched an open grant call focusing on disruptive technologies for small satellites and also on satellite data exploitation. So we are very excited, at the possibilities in terms of, I think, what our research community could come up with. But already, I think, we have ongoing research projects to do with, I think, the domains I mentioned earlier: aviation, maritime, sustainability. And maybe I'll just give you a few quick examples. I mean, so one of the areas that we are looking at is space-based VHF voice communications. And what this can really facilitate is really to enable air traffic controllers to talk to pilots in areas not covered today by terrestrial communications. I think most folks will know for VHF voice comms today, we're talking about, I think, 200, 250 miles out. So there are certain pockets, for instance, in oceanic airspace where the pilots today rely on just either satellite communications, the traditional, or things like HF radios, for example. So with VHF voice comms, that gives them, I think, much better access to that connectivity that they need to allow, I think, air traffic management to be done a lot better. Another area that I think we're looking at is how satellite data can better support weather prediction, for instance. So, again, it's something that's rather challenging, I think, for our region today. I think unlike, say, temperate climates, where the models are very well established, and there's, I think, much better ability, I think, to do weather prediction. I think in the tropics, we still face a lot of challenges because of the unique nature of the weather system here. So satellite data potentially can provide us with much, I suppose, better outcomes when we're talking about weather prediction. Maybe one more example is, in the area of SAR technologies. That's also something of interest to us because a lot of our region, I think, is affected by cloud cover. And, I don't know whether you guys can hear it, but it's actually raining quite heavily where I am now. And so, with things like tropical weather, cloud cover, traditional visible satellite imagery doesn't really help us very much. We need technologies like SAR, synthetic aperture radar technologies, to help us to overcome, I think, the challenges. But here again, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And Singapore, I think, because we recognize the challenge, we are, I think, launching 2 or 3 SAR satellites over the next few years, I think, just to help with this challenge. And hopefully, commercial companies can better make use of SAR data to apply them to applications like agriculture, environmental monitoring, and so on. And that will really then bring about, I think, a lot of benefits for the region. Yeah, back to you, Marco.
Certainly, I can empathize with the weather aspects of the tropics. I've had my fair share of wet days as well.
Yeah.
You were mentioning R&D and some of the exciting initiatives behind that. And I think for Dr. Norden, certainly, perhaps there are initiatives that you work with doing R&D in universities or partner space agencies, perhaps. I was wondering if you could share any aspects on that.
Okay, the space agency itself, when it was initiated, it was an R&D organization. That's the starting point. Mainly when we took in the staff, they are under researcher schemes. So we concentrate a lot on trying to work, especially with the institutional of higher learnings. We have few universities here who are quite established in terms of having some research in space. There are few on the space sciences, the space engineering, and some applications, especially in the remote sensing. Hence, the National Space Agency at that particular time was, working with all these universities, are also having research. We have worked with the EUs, they provide grants. Thank you very much, with under the F7 or something like that. I can't remember now, but we did receive grants from Italy, from Germany, and even UK. They help us a lot. In order for us to not only concentrate on the R&D, but basically building up our expertise, because this is one of the areas that we have R&D mainly for us to build our expertise in this country. So yes, we do have, but it's very competitive. Space is still not the I would say an area that we consider as the priority. Thus, the research grant, research availability is quite competitive. Thank you.
Dr. Perez, it's a nice segue to you. Do you see capacity building and competitiveness from where you're sitting in the Philippines?
All right, I believe this is also in connection to the role of the universities and the R&D in the space ecosystem. Is that correct, Marco?
Yes.
Right?
That's
all
right.
Yes, certainly. This is actually very important, and this is something that we at the Philippine Space Agency is really focusing as well. So as we build satellites, develop products out of it, we also build the capacity of our human workforce. So we make sure that this is nurtured and strengthened through various programs. So the role of the universities is very important here, because they ensure that there is this steady supply of human resources. This really happens in the university. You get them to do research, you get them to work on cutting edge projects. They advance their degrees, they get master's, PhD, doctorate degrees. So these are all very relevant as we build our space ecosystem. So I should also add that, as I've mentioned earlier, prior to PhilSA, we already have space technology development activities. And really, these were happening in the university. So our first satellite, Diwata 1, was built in collaboration with our partners from Japan University, Hokkaido University, and Tohoku University through Filipino students, scholars that went there to study to get their master's degree and PhD, and at the same time build the satellite. So this model is also something that we continue. This time in the Philippines, we have our own satellite development program, building CubeSats, and this time involving other universities in the country, having students from different universities across different regions in the country working on CubeSats project. So I think this is something that we really nurture and we want to develop further into the future.
That's a really interesting insight, Dr. Perez. And you mentioned challenges and reconciling them and trying to bridge these gaps, which actually I believe Chris touched on earlier, and recognizing the challenges for the folks in Singapore and perhaps Southeast Asia as a whole. Chris, do you see any other challenges within the space industry from your side?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier that, you know, we are, of course, I think very keen to encourage private space players to better serve the region. But that in itself, I suppose it's easier said than done, as with all these things, right? Well, I mean, let me give you maybe one example. So a lot of the space-based solutions that we see today are really geared towards other regions of the world, so Europe or the US, for example. So a lot of the solutions that are perhaps developed may not be directly applicable to our region. So an example of that is, say, agriculture, right? Where, you know, in many parts of the world, I think agriculture is dominated by large farms. I mean, I think some of the farms in the US may be larger than certain, I don't know, small cities, right, in our region. Whereas, you know, if you think about Southeast Asia and farming in Southeast Asia, you know, that largely takes place in smaller plots of land. So if you think about remote sensing techniques, for example, that are applied today for agriculture monitoring, if they are developed, say, to look at agriculture in the US, in Europe, and so on, they may not quite work very well here, right? So there's, I think, work that needs to be done by researchers, by industry, to really ensure that the technologies are ready for application in our region. You know, I was also talking about cloud cover earlier. And again, you know, a lot of the work that's been done, I think when we're talking about remote sensing, is catered towards your visible satellite imagery. SAR is something I think relatively newer. And, you know, the techniques, I think, really for interpreting and analyzing SAR data for applications of interest to our region is probably, you know, much less mature compared to traditional visible satellite imagery. So in a way, I think there's a lot more work that's needed on the part of researchers and industry to really ensure that the space-based solutions we have today can better serve, I think, Southeast Asia's needs. But I think therein also, you know, when we talk about challenges, therein also lies, I think, many opportunities, right, for folks here to really work on these, to make sure that we can, I think, collectively as a region, bring to bear these space technologies for the benefit of the region.
Yeah. I'm just going to circle to Dr. Norden for picking your brains a little bit on some of the challenges that you see from Malaysia, not too far from Singapore, but I'd love to hear those.
Okay, as highlighted, currently we are just starting the bill. That means the challenges is on the governance part of it. You know, we are able to, if we can steer the focus of the, especially because no programs, no space program is without the government support. So that's important. Although you may have all the industries having disease trying to come in, but there must be a lot of government support in this area. So the governance is one of the areas that we have to look in any country that want to start space program. That will be an important part. We may have, I mean, Malaysia actually may have gone quite advanced in certain areas like international relations, and having a lot of support from other parts of the world. But we may be lacking, as put in, maybe the challenging part is even to bring in the new generations in short expertise in this area by having more opportunities, probably startups, probably research, probably these are the areas that we feel that we need to create more opportunities in order to build up and sustain the people in this area. Besides, of course, the expectation of any government that we can drive some economy from here. It's very much a cycle, because we try to build expertise, but there is the expectation of the economy and how we can bring in, because usually without having by just spending without having bringing in certain aspect of the economy, there will be less motivation to it. So these are the challenges that we face here. Thank you.
Dr. Nordik, it seems like a natural sort of progression from there to maybe look into the imaginary crystal ball into the future. You mentioned the challenges. Do you see an evolution of this going forward? Do you see perhaps certain solutions to help address these?
Okay, I mean, there are a lot of efforts have been put in order for us to ensure that we are in the right footstep in moving ahead. Of course, as I mentioned, the effort, especially by the government, have been quite positive, especially having putting up the bills in order to ensure that the governance of the space sector are taken care. In terms of technology, I think we hope that the universities will be able to take up the challenges, and the industries now is coming in. There are few startups as well as big corporates who start to put interest in space sector and helping, hopefully working together with the universities to build expertise. As for the industries, we it's very slow, mainly of course due to the economic reason as well, but hopefully the areas that I've mentioned in terms of the challenges, if it's not been able to be solved, but it is going toward to be minimizing the challenges and also trying to improve the situation. That's how I look at it. There are efforts, of course, by all players here.
I'm just going to circle over to Dr. Perez. Perhaps, Dr. Perez, you could tease a little bit about what we might be able to see in the next decade or so in the future for yourself and the Philippines.
Thank you. And I guess that would go back to the first question of where we are right now and where the trajectory that would lead us to. So, well, currently it's a very exciting time to be in this, to be part of the space sector. I would reiterate that there is an increase, I mean, the technology is becoming more affordable, more accessible, hence we are seeing more players coming in. I can imagine there would be increase in commercialization of various aspects of the space sector. I can imagine more private companies doing their share, I mean, taking part aside from the government and the agents and the universities. So yeah, I guess this is, well, like what I imagine for the future, but also sort of dream for the future in the Philippines, to really get more involvement from the private sectors. And of course, without, I mean, with the government giving its continued support as we are receiving right now, and the universities and the academe taking its fair share in advancing the science and the technology part. Yeah, so, and also if I may add, I guess there would also be increase really in the appreciation of the space-based solutions, recognizing that it really help us in our day-to-day lives, it improve lives. We see it now as like part of just like navigation system now, like right when you order food or when you go to place, it's something you don't really think of as a space, but it's there. It helps you make your decisions. So similarly, maybe we think of weather prediction, we think of agriculture intervention, farming management practices. In the future, we may be using this kind of information seamlessly as we make day-to-day decisions. So that's how I imagine it for us.
Fully agree, Dr. Perez. Chris, do you anticipate or perhaps forecast some next steps from yourself and Singapore?
So I think definitely, we are seeing, I think, a lot more activities going on here in Singapore. I mentioned earlier that we started our space journey fairly recently. I mean, we launched our first indigenously developed satellite only about 10 years ago, I think 2011. And over that time, well, over the past decade, we have, I think, launched about 15 satellites since then. But I think if you just look ahead, from what we understand from our local players here, just in the next 2 to 3 years, we already surpassed that number. We're planning to launch more than 15 satellites just in the next 2 to 3 years. So in a sense, activity here is growing exponentially. So that's something that I think we are very excited about. We're also seeing, I think, more investments into the space players here in Singapore. So some of our startups have gotten fairly respectable funding from VCs, both locally as well as VCs overseas. And we hope, of course, that will continue to grow as well. And I think indeed, many of them are also, I think, venturing out more into the region. So Pacific that I mentioned earlier, the broadband satellite internet provider, for example, their markets, I think, are really in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And they're looking to launch a second geostationary satellite to help increase, I think, access to very much needed to regions that very much need satellite internet. Right. We also have others that are also looking at potentially how else they can serve the region in terms of remote sensing applications. So we have companies like Geo Insights who are really into the data analytics aspects of things, and I think they're really looking at how they can serve mining operators, farms, even shipping companies, for instance, to better understand the marine environment. So I think there's a lot really going on. But maybe I may also just add one more aspect, because I think we've been talking about, I think, space really in the near future, and I thought there's a lot to be excited about. For all of us when we think about space slightly further out, and perhaps looking beyond just the region, but also to what others around the world are doing. Because I think everyone has been following the news, but certainly in terms of space exploration, for instance, and I mentioned earlier that my favorite movie is The Martian. Right? So here we are, I think, seeing a lot of efforts by many countries, even private players, to get humankind to Mars. And if Elon Musk has his way, I think he says we'll have the first human set foot on Mars by 2026. Right, so I think that's something. These developments are also something that can, I think, excite the region, excite many of our youths. We spoke about universities, I think, training talent for the space industry, for the space sector. But it's also developments like these, I think, that's important to also bring out to really, make our youth understand that there's a lot going on and there are a lot of possibilities out there. And hopefully, I think if we paint that longer time frame as well, we can really get people more excited and keen to join, I think, the space sector and the space industry.
There seems to be a lot to be excited about. here, but as you mentioned, Mars in the not too distant future, 5 to 6 years is actually not very far off. Without getting too excited, I think I'm going to stop there because I know the chat box is a very active place in the moment. Faith, I don't know if you're there, but I think now is a good chance to bring a few questions from the floor. Over to you.
Thank you, Marco. Our first audience question is from Florence, and it's about space collaboration. It goes out to all the speakers. What aspects of space do you think you can collaborate on to strengthen the space economy in Southeast Asia?
Maybe I can just go first, or
sure, Chris.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we spoke a lot about the application side of things, and I thought that is really one area where there's a lot of potential for researchers to work together. Because when we're talking about developing applications that are suitable for our regions, you really need folks that really understand the local environment, right? You can't really create generic application and expect them to work. For example, right? So this is one area where I thought researchers can really come together to look at how to better develop applications that are specific to our region, and this could be in many areas. I mean, we spoke about I think climate weather issues, for example. So that's something that I think still needs a lot of work. But things like agriculture, again, we've spoken about this earlier as well. And again, given the unique conditions here, there's, I think, a lot of scope really for researchers to come together and look at how we can better develop the AI algorithms, for example, they are needed, better train them, right, to identify, I think, the specific problem statements that we face here, and then to apply them.
Okay, I'll try to have some words in this area. A space economy is something new in this region, but as highlighted by Chris just now, I think the efforts, if talking about collaborations, there are a lot of talks and in fact, it was an agenda in the intergovernment meeting on this area of space economy, especially why, I mean, we're thinking about building the satellites, single satellites, but I mean, owned by several states. That's just an example that are proposed, I would say about 10 years ago, not even recently, but it doesn't work well. But of course, in this area of application, there are plenty of collaboration that can be done. Except for upstreams, there are still a lot of, because of the technology itself is also a control, but it's a control technology, so there's some politics involvement over there. But otherwise, on the application part, I think there are a lot of opportunities and avenues. Talking about navigation, especially satellite communication, there's a lot of works have been done together in most of the countries, as well as remote sensing is also another. Something that can return economy, usually there's not much problem in terms of collaborations. But in terms of works that involve research, upstreams, and also this within the control technologies, is an area that we still look forward to how we can work together. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if I may add, if we talk about applications, I mean, I agree with both Chris and Dr. Nordin. It's, I guess, one step to start on is really making data accessible. So through data sharing across different countries in the region. And I think that's something we can really work on. And in fact, I'm aware of previous efforts and ongoing efforts where satellite data are provided every time there's like disaster or humanitarian issues. And we can extend it not just to this events, but even in tackling other concerns, like as Chris mentioned, in agriculture, in weather. I couldn't agree more that our region is actually quite unique in a sense, from the rest of the world, where most of the satellite data products were actually developed and tested and calibrated. So we still have to do our fair share of calibration, of validating the data, improving the quality of the satellite products that would be specifically tailored for the needs of our region. And we can work together and collaborate on these efforts. As for the upstream side, I agree also with Dr. Nordine. There could be some challenges, restrictions on working together on like one satellite mission. But what we can also look into is having like a constellation mission where countries can agree to contribute their own satellite and make it as part of a constellation fulfilling a bigger mission. And I think that's something we can start talking about.
Okay, the next question is actually for Dr. Perez, but it's open to anyone if anyone wants to jump in. So this is from Alisa from the Philippines, and she's curious about opportunities for high school students in terms of internships related to space medicine or other fields.
Okay, thank you for the question. I actually saw there are several related questions on that, and I want to answer it by saying that at the Philippine Space Agency, we do have a Space Education and Scholarship Division, which focuses on this program. So it covers not just the internship program for high school and college student, but also developing ways on how we can improve or integrate STEM curriculum, integrate the space science into the STEM curriculum. So that goes as far back as basic education. Then as for the internship, I must say that at this point, we are really in a build up. So we don't have an institutionalized internship program yet. But we encourage students who are interested to just reach out to us. We will have some programs and activities for you. It may not be like the typical internship program of your school, but we would craft something that would really, I guess, sustain the interest that you have on various applications of space and even on the space technology development itself. For the scholarship aspect, we are working closely with government agencies that caters this, like the Department of Science and Technology and the Commission on Higher Education. So we hope to collaborate with them to have scholarship programs specific for space science technology and its applications. So there's a lot in lineup. So we are working hard to get this to our students. So something for you to watch out for.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Perez. The next question is directed to Mr. Chris, and this is from Zen from Singapore. How can people from other industries do a mid-career switch to the space industry?
Yeah, thanks, Zen, for that question. Actually, I suspect it's really a matter of whether the person has a passion or interest in the space industry, because I think a lot of the skill sets can be picked up along the way. Or maybe if you look at the question in a few ways, one is, of course, depending on the kind of roles that you're looking to play. And I think certainly if you're looking at the space industry, I don't know whether there's a perception that it's traditionally an area for only scientists and engineers only. But I think first of all, I think that's not quite the case. I think there's room for everyone really when we're talking about the space industries, right? I mean, you need space economists, you need space lawyers, you need business people, over and above, I think the scientists and the engineers, of course. So I think regardless of which background you come from, I think there are a lot of opportunities for people that want to enter the space industry. But of course, I think, for you to enter the industry, depending on what background you have, there's obviously some work that you will need to do to build up your own knowledge of the industry. And here again, I think there are opportunities available for folks to really look at how they can acquire some of these skill sets. I mean, I think, for example, the International Space University does a lot of good work. And actually, I'm in terms of the information put out there by many players, even I think SGAC, right? I think there's a lot of information out there that's very useful to folks that are thinking about working in the sector. So, I don't think there's any specific requirement per se, but rather just I think that passion and interest in wanting to join the sector, and then doing some of that homework to pick up some of these knowledge and skill sets to then enter the sector.
Thank you, Mr. Chris. Definitely, space involves everyone from all backgrounds. The next question is from Sazwan from Malaysia, and is directed at Dr. Nordin. And he asks, is there any chance that the private sector can get involved in space agency activities in Malaysia?
Okay, I would say yes and no. The yes part is that there are, facilities that's available for the private sectors to share or to come together and work together, using the facilities available, as well as the resources, the manpower that's available. Yes, the private sectors are very much welcome to work together and cooperate in some of those areas. On the other hand, there are unfortunately not much opportunities in terms of funding and financial. This is quite a competitive, so they can participate to join in and bid for a certain project together. There's no problem in getting the funding. But in terms of other aspects, as I said, the downstream, the application areas, I think there are a lot of opportunities to work together. But in terms of upstream, there are some restrictions and limitations, and then we are going around it. Hopefully, it will able to bring in more industries to work together with the space agency. That's how I can put in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nordin. I think we only have time for one more question. So I'm going to pick this interesting question that goes out to all the speakers. This is from Ryson from Singapore. And he asks, does Southeast Asia have any plans to participate in the International Lunar Research Station led by China and Russia?
Okay, I'll just based on previous experience that we have working together with international. Usually, if for these purposes, this purpose is for Lunar, I don't think there's any problem in doing that. Mainly because it doesn't involve any control technology. It doesn't involve so much on a political side of it. It's just working together in a scientific way. So I mean, I think this sort of program is very, very much welcome. Yeah, I don't see any issue in working together. That's
Okay, so for the case of the Philippines, so the Philippine Space Agency is very active in bringing the country into the international space cooperation platform. So we are engaging with different countries, and I don't see how this would be different in terms of advancing the space science and technology for the country.
Yeah, maybe just add on very quickly. I think I fully agree. There's certainly always scope for scientific collaboration, and I think what many countries are doing with respect to activities on the moon as well as potentially Mars in the future. I think that's something that's very exciting. I think for both researchers and industry alike. So I certainly see scope also for collaboration.
Okay, thank you all speakers and all the audience for your questions. I think that's all the time we have. But if you have any more questions, feel free to write in to us and we'll direct it to the speakers. Yeah, so back to you, Marco.
Thanks, Faith. Wow, very wide-ranging conversation. We covered a lot of different topics, fantastic questions, and some really, really interesting and curious answers. To go around the table for final remarks and closing, Dr. Norden, please.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to congratulate SGAC for this effort. I think it has to be continued, especially to create interest with the new generations. We merely lacking in this. We do have in our government here they call a section where we have a space education as one of our trusts. So we do approach all the schools, do space camps, that sort of thing. But having able to bring in people from other side of the world, that's something commendable that I think we should be continuing with this effort, and hopefully it create more interest and also more opportunities to work together. That's my final word. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Norden, for coming today. Dr. Perez, over to you.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank SJAC for inviting me to take part in this forum. It's very insightful also for myself, and I hope the audience was able to get something also from the discussions that we had. As Dr. Nordin said, this is something we need to continue. These kinds of discussion needs to to be sustained, and also for the young people here. I believe there are many students in this room. Please keep interested in space. I hope we were able to convince you enough that this is such an exciting time to be part of the space sector, to contribute either in the upstream or the downstream. So yeah, I look forward really to having more of this kind of discussion. And thanks to the organizers, to Marco, to Jillian, Faith, Satesh, and of course to my co-panelists, Chris and Dr. Nordin. I learned a lot from listening to you. So thank you and have a pleasant day to everyone.
Chris.
Yeah, I would like to, I think, join my fellow panelists as well in commending, I think, SGAC for the good work that you guys are doing. Thanks very much for the invitation. And I think really, conversations like these are definitely useful, I think, in really stirring up interest in the space industry in our region. And I thought I should, we can't overemphasize this, right? But this is really an exciting time for us when we're talking about space in Southeast Asia. Because really there's so much opportunity really for us to open up the use of space to better serve our region. So I just want to also, I think echo everyone to encourage those participating here, but also maybe others to really take a closer look at space and our region and really join us on this journey, I think, to tap on space to bring about better benefits for Southeast Asia. Thank you.
A wonderful way to wrap, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us. Jillian, I'm going to hand this back to you for the closing.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you to all our panelists. That was a very insightful discussion, and I think our audience really enjoyed that. Well, again, we're sorry that we weren't able to get to all the questions. Like Faith said, if you have any pressing questions that you want answered, you can always email us. Alternatively, we are also continuing to host more of the SpiSEA webinars in the coming months, so you can always join us there to get your questions answered in those webinars. We also this afternoon have another session, which is the SGAC open house. We have an open house which will have some speakers at 1:30. Yeah, it will be in about 1:30 GMT +8. Satesh has shared the link in the chat if you are interested to check that out. We believe it will be another exciting discussion there.